If you read through the Gospels closely, you notice something strange for short books that are supposedly biographies of a famous religious leader's life. Namely, they spend a disproportional amount of time on the events surrounding Jesus' death as compared to the space given to the rest of his life. Two of the authors, Mark and John, tell us nothing at all about even his birth. I remember explaining this during one of the first midweek church, you kind of think of church in quotes, services that we did at the Dream Center in downtown Birmingham, Woodlawn, about a decade ago. I could tell that some of the attendees, particularly the ones who weren't steeped in religious culture, they felt ripped off, like the gospel writers had kept something from them. What? They don't talk about his childhood? Someone asked. These people that were attending often interrupted sermons to ask questions. No, nothing other than the time he wandered from his mom and dad and was later found 3 days later teaching in the temple. Someone wanted to know if he had bad parents, how they let young Jesus disappear for 3 days before they even noticed. And that's a legit concern, right? Anyway, that episode, Jesus getting left behind, happened during the feast of Passover, which is completely relevant to our conversation here. And since everyone was amazed at the 12-year-old Jesus's understanding, you wonder how he may have been connecting the verses that we're about to discuss even during that time. Okay, we'll get to that later. When we tell people's stories, we always talk about where they came from and what things were like when they were young. The authors of the first 4 books of the New Testament shake it up, though. They each rush through the first 30 years of Jesus' time on earth, tell us a series of stories pulled from his 3-year public ministry, and then land on his death. Each of the authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then write in great detail about the cross and the events surrounding it. It's as if they're alerting us to the fact that there is far more happening in that death than we might have imagined. The Passion is the name commonly given to crucifixion and that final 24-hour period of Jesus' life. One read through any of the Gospels, and it makes sense that these books have often been called, here's a quote from a theologian, Martin Coller, passion narratives with extended introductions. The writers skip most of the material that common biographers usually routinely tell us. What color hair did Jesus have? We don't know. How tall was he? No idea. Was he funny? Probably, it seems, if you read some of the stories, but we really aren't sure. Did he walk with the swagger? Was he even a good carpenter? Did he have to figure out his calling, or did he always know? They skip things like this, and then the authors slow down dramatically when they get to the Last Supper. Indeed, the Passion occupies a great percentage of their writing space. 26% of Luke focuses on the cross and the events surrounding it. 33% of Matthew focuses on this 24-hour period. 37% of Mark, 42% of John. Yet, it's highly appropriate that they rush and then settle. As one teacher explains, quote, that relatively short space of time is the most significant period to have occurred in the history of the world. In fact, the 24-hour period surrounding the cross, it's the basis for living a life of freedom. Well, when we come to the cross, we're talking about the topic of redemption. What is redemption? Peter writes about this phase, even though he's not one of the gospel writers, was a disciple, an apostle. He says in his first letter, 1 Peter 1:18 and 19, we are redeemed, there's the word, by the blood of the Lamb. Now, if redemption was a small thing, the authors could cover it quickly. The details of Jesus' blood require a great deal of ink and white space, though, presumably because redemption is far more grandiose than you might have imagined. So, what is redemption? Before discussing how big and how all encompassing the work of redemption is, it makes sense to first outline what the word even means. Redemption, it's a common Bible word, a term we read a lot and even mention a great deal. We sing it in songs, it's in t-shirts, it's on mugs. You've probably even heard the word, but it's one of those words we really don't understand. The word was in common use in the ancient world, specifically the word redemption. Now, here's a quote from Mahesh Chabda. It was, quote, used in slave markets to refer to the price paid either to purchase a person or to purchase that person's release. So you could buy the person and then have control and charge of them from a slave market, or if they were a slave, you might buy their freedom. Outside of the church today, we use the word in pawn shops. When someone comes to free or buy back their property which has been held, they pay the redemption price and their property is then given to them. Now, you're probably starting to make some of the theological connections. In seminary, I learned about here's the term, law of first mention. It's a precept that tells us to really comprehend something in the biblical narrative. We need to dig deep into the first time we see the word or concept introduced, hence the first mention. So to understand the redeeming work of Jesus and to comprehend everything achieved by his blood, we need to travel way back to the Old Testament book of Exodus. That's where we first find the word, and we learn that the story of Israel's freedom provides incredible insight into the life Jesus offers each of us to live right now. The first time we see the word redemption is in Exodus 6:6, when the Lord mentions that he will, future tense, he will redeem his people. Now, make note of that. To understand redemption and what Jesus does, we travel back to the beginning of the second book of the Bible. Whereas modern theologians often quote, you may have heard this phrase if you grew up in the church, as I did, they quote the Roman road. That's the title they give it. And look at Paul's teaching throughout the book of Romans, just kind of cherry picking some very pivotal verses that make an outline through that book. Paul and the other New Testament authors don't take us to Romans. They take us back farther, even centuries before Christ. They dive into Exodus. There, in the original story, God commands Moses to tell all of Israel, here's Exodus 6:6, quoted, I will deliver you from slavery. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. God said that to Moses from the burning bush. I will deliver you from slavery. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. Again, God refers to redemption in the future tense. It's not yet happened. Now, notice this too. Judgment is also about to happen. Judgment occurs with redemption, but, and this is incredibly important to hang on to, judgment is not happening to God's people. Judgment is going somewhere else. And you've got to note that, because so often in preaching today, it's a lot about judgment. Notice, though, where the judgment is going, not to God's people, it's going somewhere else. These people are getting redeemed. Somehow in the church today, we often think that God intends to redeem us, and also prior to our redemption, we're the objects of his wrath. That's not how this story reads, though. Now, this is the word that God again declared to Moses to communicate to the people. You're going to be free. You're going to be redeemed. You're no longer going to be a slave. That's what God meant by redemption, freedom. Or to say it another way, you're destined for redemption and freedom. You're not destined for judgment and wrath. Notably, this is exactly what Paul told the church in Thessalonica when he wrote his first letter to them. 1 Thessalonians 5:9, he says, quote, God has not destined us for wrath, but for redemption. To repeat, the first time we see the word appear, redemption, is when God tells his people, I will redeem you. I will free you from slavery. He says that redemption is a future thing he will do. The second time we see the word redeem in the Bible is in Exodus 15:13. Miriam, that's Moses' big sister, celebrates after the children of Israel walk through the Red Sea. She sings, these are the people whom you have redeemed. Past tense. Whereas Moses heard about redemption as a future action that God promised to do, Miriam refers to it as something that's just occurred. Okay, notice it. The first use of redeem promises that God will free his people. Exodus 6:6. God speaking to Moses in the wilderness. The second use of redeem declares that God has done it. Exodus 15:13. Miriam singing on the other side of the Red Sea after the children of Israel have been freed. The only event between the two usages is the Exodus, the actual Exodus itself, the exit from slavery in Egypt. That's what the word redeem describes. Looking back at this event hundreds of years later, King David prayed in gratitude in 2 Samuel 7:23 and 1 Chronicles 17:21. Same passage written in both locations says this. So it's a question of praise. Who is like your people Israel, the one nation on earth whom God went to redeem to be his people, making himself a name and doing great and awesome things by driving out before your people whom you redeemed for yourself from Egypt. Clearly, the word points to the Exodus, to God's deliverance of his people from slavery. Okay, so let's shift to the New Testament. When Jesus is born, we are told that he is the Redeemer. That is, he is the one who brings freedom from slavery. That's what the word redemption meant, freedom from slavery. A few verses. Zechariah prophesied that the Lord visited his people and that with the coming of John the Baptist to be the forerunner of the Messiah, redemption has been set in motion. Luke 1:68. Zechariah was John the Baptist's father. Anna, the prophetess, declares Jesus' goodness to all in the temple who are waiting for here's the word, awaiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. Luke 2:38. Anna was the prophetess who prayed night and day in the temple for decades waiting to see the Messiah. The travelers on the road to Emmaus, this is after Jesus' death, speak to Jesus, not knowing his identity, telling him that they thought that Jesus was the one who would redeem Israel, Luke 24:21, but that Jesus had just died on the cross, and they did not yet know that he had risen from the dead. People in Jesus' day would have understood these statements that God will redeem his people, that we thought he was the one to redeem. They would have understood these as political statements. They lived in a land, the promised land, that had been offered to them, promised to them, the very land their forefathers were given by God after they were freed from slavery in Egypt. But these people in Jesus' day weren't free. Rome occupied their territory, warlording them as subjects of Caesar. They were literally second-class citizens in a land that should have been their own. Knowing that they wanted physical governmental freedom in their day, it helps you and I understand the statements in the New Testament through a unique lens. For instance, remember the time James and John asked if they could sit on the right and left of Jesus when he finally had his kingdom? Mark 10:37 and other places. Or what about the time Pilate asked Jesus to explain his kingdom as if it were something that had boundaries like any other kingdom on the earth? It's John 18:33, right before Pilate offered him over to be executed. Do you remember the time after the resurrection when the disciples asked if now was finally the time Jesus was restoring the kingdom to Israel? That's Acts 1:6, right before he ascended up to heaven. Redemption, in their mind, was a word that linked Jesus to freedom, to a freedom from the yoke of bondage. And it was all something that would impact their life in the moment. It wasn't well, we'll wait until we die and go to heaven, and then we'll see what really matters. They were thinking in terms of a life that mattered right then. Looking back at the life of Christ, Paul reminds the leaders of the church of Ephesus that Jesus, here's the word again, redeemed the church by his blood, Acts 20:22. In other words, because of what he achieved, something is now different. History has changed. Our destiny has been altered. We've been transformed. Life is different. Revelation 5:9-10 contains the lyrics of a song being offered to Jesus, stating one of the key reasons that he is worthy of worship. Now, the saints all sing in unison. By the way, every tribe, every tongue, every nation, every people group, all around the throne declare, you were slain and you have redeemed us to God by your blood. Redemption means freedom. And it means freedom now in this life, not later when you die. In other words, to state it plainly, redemption is a current reality, not only a future hope. Well, very few of us, at first glance, identify ourselves with the slavery that the Israelites experienced in Egypt, or even that the Jews in the days of Jesus might have declared that they experienced as second-rate citizens with a class of Rome warlording over them, occupying their territory. And though these may be difficult stories for us to relate to, you and I do use, just here's kind of how I term it, slave language, victim language all of the time. Almost daily, we communicate that we're constrained, held back by something. We say things like, I'm held back by my genetics, or I don't have enough education or training. Maybe I grew up in the wrong neighborhood and my parents didn't give me the opportunities that so-and-so had. Or we don't have enough money. Even this one, I'm the wrong race, the wrong gender, wrong sexual orientation. So people like me don't get the opportunities that others receive. When we attempt to overcome these barriers, some of them real barriers, and we try to overcome them. We strive to move forward. We often insert false redeemers into the equation. So we get married thinking it will heal our hurts. We strive to make more money, to acquire more stuff, or accumulate experiences everyone else wants. We often do this to show our value and worth, all by raising our socioeconomic status or by changing our perceived status quo. That's why we really post it all over social media now. I mean, who just goes on vacation or buys a car or renovates a house without letting other people know? Strangers, not just friends, but people on the internet. We go to school, we change careers, we seek new hobbies, we lose weight, gain weight, get new haircuts, go shopping, try new relationships, and sometimes even go under the surgical knife to alter our bodies. Now, think back to that whole cluster of everything I just said. All these changes. I want you to notice something about it, something that's really important. Here it is. The truth is, none of these things are sin issues. However, although these things aren't bad in and of themselves, none of these are redeemers. They cannot bring freedom, though they may, and often do, facilitate a temporary sense of relief. By themselves, they're the equivalent of emotional band-aids. You can acquire any combination of these things, even all of these, and still lose your soul. See Luke 9:25. In fact, many of us do. We amass all the things we think will make life feel worthwhile. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you are there, yet we still sense a need for something more. One of Jesus' disciples, Peter, I've already mentioned him, he looked back on Jesus' death and wrote this: "You were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but you were redeemed with the precious blood of Jesus Christ, as a lamb without blemish and spot." Now notice this. Even though your redemption affects life in this world, it wasn't purchased by anything you can acquire in this world. Notice, we were redeemed, that means freed, by the precious blood of Jesus. So, since we've been redeemed or freed by the blood of Jesus, let's talk through the following briefly. What does Jesus free us from? That would be important to know. Where did Jesus achieve the work of redemption? Also important. And what does Jesus redeem us to? Why are we actually even free? Now, most often people answer with something like this: sin. Jesus redeems us from sin. The writers of the New Testament go farther, though. Jesus redeems us from sin, yes, and so much more. In the same way that God didn't redeem Israel from slavery to simply let them linger in the wilderness sin-free, Jesus doesn't just redeem us from our bondage, he redeems us to our destiny. Now, let me introduce you to two words which will help you understand how big salvation truly is. We'll quickly evaluate a noun and a verb used throughout the Bible in the New Testament that describe this redemption. Now, the noun used to denote salvation is soteria. It was written in the Greek language, but if you're spelling it in English, they have a different alphabet. It would be Soteria, soteria. Paul uses soteria in Romans 1:16. He says the gospel is the power of God to soteria. The gospel is the power of God to salvation. He says that the gospel, the good news of your freedom, is the power of salvation. When you hear the truth declared, something dynamic happens. The Greek word for power in that verse is dunamis, which actually means dynamite. The gospel is the dynamite of God to soteria, salvation. If you've ever had an aha moment, when you've read something, heard something, or encountered something about God's grace, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's dynamite. Maybe You've even had dynamite going off in your mind just over the last few moments as we've been talking here. The Greek word for saved, verb, is sozo. Romans 10:19 tells us that when we confess our sins, we are sozo. That is, we are saved. So the noun is soteria, the verb sozo. Sozo includes the work of forgiveness, but it also encompasses more. Because the meaning of sozo is so comprehensive, when we see the word in the New Testament, we're actually forced to evaluate the context to see how the word is used. Otherwise, we'll shortchange it. You see, sozo means this. Here's a concept I grabbed from Pastor Derek Prince in his book, Bought with the Blood. It means, quote, an overhaul of the will, internal cleansing, health and healing, prosperity, restoration of dominion and authority, joy, and purpose. Go back through the list. An overhaul of the will, internal cleansing, health, healing, prosperity, restoration of dominion and authority, joy, purpose. In other words, sozo, that act of being saved, is more far-reaching, more complete than forgiveness of sins. Not to minimize forgiveness, there's just so much more that comes along with the package. If you grab a Bible commentary and study the word sozo, saved, you begin to see just how broad redemption is. Consider just a few of the things that sozo means in the Bible. Here are 4. First, sozo refers to physical healing. Mark summarizes Jesus' ministry in the following way. Now remember, Mark was one of the biographies of Jesus that rushed to the Passion. Mark says this, Mark 6:56. Whenever he entered into the villages, cities, or the country, they laid out the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment, and as many as touched him were made well. The word well is actually the word sozo, the same word we use for saved. As many as touched him were sozo. This isn't a one-time occurrence. The word sozo often refers to physical healing throughout the New Testament. For instance, a woman with a continual menstrual flow reaches to touch Jesus' garment as she pushes her way through a crowd to get near him. She believes she will be healed if she touches, at least in her mind, she says, the hem of his garment. She aggressively pushes through a crowd and reaches, grabs him. Though he can't see her, Jesus feels her touch. He declares that her faith has made her sozo. Luke 8:47 through 48. Your faith has made you sozo. James 5:14, way at the end of the New Testament, instructs the elders of the church to pray for a fellow brother or sister who is physically ill. They're promised the prayer of faith will sozo them. It's translated in English as heal. The prayer of faith will heal them, sozo, causing both physical healing and the emotional burden of any sins, guilt, or shame they're carrying. Again, this denotes both salvation and deliverance from suffering in the same word. Apparently, the biblical authors did not make a distinction between spiritual healing and physical healing. It all fit together as part of what Jesus came to do. Second use of sozo. Sozo refers to demonic deliverance. When Jesus encountered the famous demoniac referred to as Legion in the area of the Gadarenes, he sent the demons into a herd of pigs that ran down the cliff into the lake, and then they drowned. The people from the city ran to see the former madman who used to break chains and cut himself among the local tombs. The Bible states that the local people, also who had seen it, told them by what means he who had been demon possessed was healed. Luke 8:36. The word healed, you probably already got it. They told him by what means he who had been demon possessed was sozo. Here, sozo refers to freedom from demonic oppression. Third use, sozo refers to physical safety. Now, I know this sounds strange, so let's just evaluate it in action. In Matthew 8:25, the disciples find themselves in the middle of a raging storm. This is the famous episode where Jesus sleeps through the calamity. They awake him, exclaiming, "Sozo us." In English, it reads, "Save us." But the disciples were not, in my opinion, asking Jesus to administer last rites to them and absolve them of any unforgiven sin. The system of Catholicism that invented this practice would not be around for another few hundred years. No, the disciples are begging Jesus to rescue them. They are, even as trained boatmen, many of them scared to death. Physical safety, sozo. Fourth use. Fourth, sozo refers to raising the dead. In Luke 8:40, we meet Jairus, the ruler of the local synagogue. He seeks Jesus' assistance for healing as his daughter has become ill. While speaking with Jesus, and after being delayed by the woman with the flow of blood that we just referenced, the one who is also made sozo, messengers come and tell Jairus that it is of no use. His girl died while he's been speaking with Jesus. Jesus replies by telling Jairus not to be afraid, but to continue believing as he had, and his girl will be made sozo. The girl will be made well. The girl will be made sozo. He says this in Luke 8:50. Now, you know the end of the story. Jesus raises the daughter to life. Here, do you see, putting these stories together, these examples, the breadth, the expansiveness of salvation, of redemption? And this is just it's the proverbial tip of the iceberg. One pastor, Larry Huck, writes this, another quote: "Our redemption is total, and it covers everything Jesus shed his blood for, which is every part of us and every one of us. The only way redemption can fall short is if we don't know it and we don't apply it." He adds, salvation is not limited to the forgiveness of sins. You see, salvation is bigger than we typically think. It includes the restoration of all of life. That's what is said in Acts 3:21. Indeed, the gospel is good news. In fact, the Greek word translated gospel literally means nearly too good to be true good news. Jesus has been far more successful than you can possibly imagine. Well, since the Exodus is our picture of redemption, that's the first time the word was used. Remember the law of first mention. We should be able to read the story of Moses and Miriam and Aaron and the people freed from Pharaoh's death grip and trace identical parallels with Jesus as he faces and finishes his work on the cross. The results should be similar. Chase this rabbit with me. In Exodus, the people were all slaves, having no ability to make choices and decisions. They had no will that could be exercised, no self-determination. They were bound. They were also, oddly enough, spiritually alone. God, the concept of God, was a distant deity to them, a vague idea instead of a relational interaction with whom they communed and conversed regularly. It had been over 400 years since God had appeared to their father Abraham, telling him that his descendants would be slaves and then be freed. Genesis 15:13. They even referred to the children of Israel that were slaves. They referred to the Lord as, quote, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That is, the deity of their distant ancestors many, many generations ago. Certainly not a God that was personal and involved in their lives. See Exodus 3:6. When they were freed, though, they came to know the Lord personally. Exodus 22. He displayed his power over the Egyptians, the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. See Exodus 18:11. There's a definite relational shift. He's no longer just the God of their ancestors, but here's the phrase we pick up in Exodus 20, verse 2, the Lord your God. That personal possessive pronoun, it is a monumental shift. God also miraculously restored their health. He healed all of them to deliver them according to Psalms 105:37. The Bible tells us that there wasn't a feeble one among them. Everyone was instantly healthy. Everyone was instantly whole. Everyone walked out of slavery. They fled Egypt full of provision and prosperity too, evacuating the area of their captivity in a night. Though they owned nothing as slaves, as they left, the Egyptians became favorable towards the children of Israel, literally sending them with their own treasures and valuables. See Exodus 12:36. That evening, they became physically whole and financially free. They went from weak to well. They went from poverty to abundance. God can do more in a moment than we can struggle to do in a lifetime, in other words. His grace always outperforms our hustle. They were given victory too over each place they walked. The Lord gave them dominion and authority just as Adam and Eve originally had in the Garden of Eden. See Deuteronomy 11:24. No longer slaves, every place they stepped was theirs. Theirs to steward, theirs to manage, theirs to enhance, to elevate, to make better. They went forth with great joy and nearness to the Lord. Psalm 126:1. Yes, there was a struggle, but there was also immense joy. So, in seeing their story, do you see the layers of freedom that they were given? And it occurred in a moment. Do you see the extent of the soteria, salvation? How God, sozo, saved them. It all included self-determination and free will to be who they were designed to be, not to be held back or restrained. It included cleansing from guilt, shame, and the old identity that had marked them and held them down in a place of feeling second class and unworthy. It included physical health, wholeness. No one was feeble. They all walked out into their freedom. It included provision and abundance. They went from having literally nothing to having far more than enough. It included purpose and the ability to live that purpose. It also included an awareness and nearness of God's presence. God was no longer the God of their ancient ancestors, such that they had very little or no connection with him at all. Oh, he was the God of Abraham and Isaac, and I've heard of the stories, but who is this God? Now he was the Lord, your God, a relational connection. Forgiveness, the one thing we generally reduce our message of redemption to, is not even mentioned in the Exodus story. Yes, their sins were forgiven. Ours, mine, yours are too, but there's so much more. You see, the sacrifice that Jesus provided, it provided us with everything needed for all time and eternity, for what you and I will need in the distant future, as well as what we will need today and tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that and the next day. Jesus has redeemed you. All of you, all of life, no area of life untouched by what he's achieved. He set you free. Now it is your time to walk towards your promised land. Now it is your time to experience that freedom. My prayer for you, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his grace and his face shine upon you and touch every single part of your life. May you feel the self-determination to be who he's designed you to be. May you be healthy and whole and healed in the moment. May you experience and receive more than enough provision so that you have some for yourself and also ample to share and pass on to others. May you identify the purpose for which he has called you and empowered you to be on this planet right now to impact the world. And may you be aware of his closeness to you, that he is for you, not against you, that he'll never leave you, never forsake you, that he is always with you. Grace, peace. I'll see you soon.